Yeah, I just wanted to say that Noam Chomsky has a lot of contempt for Harris, and
Right.
that's perfectly appropriate. And I thought it was funny that Harris spent most of his time complaining about the fact that Chomsky doesn't like him and he's being rude, when Harris is always attacking Chomsky on spurious grounds anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
And then he says, it's a thought experiment, and
Right. I mean, do you have anything else that you wanted to share? Because I can get to it. I can give you my sort of brief rundown on it.
sure, yeah, go ahead. I want to hear what you think.
Well, yeah, I think basically that, and I just want to say, really quickly up top. I mean, I don't read YouTube comments, so I guess this doesn't even matter in terms of that. But I know the tweets will come, and look. Some people relate to Sam Harris like a guru, like an infallible guru. The irony of which is just never lost on me and always amusing to me. And I know people who like certain aspects of what Sam Harris say, and they're able to easily distinguish that from incredibly problematic and wrong things that he says. And I find it kind of disturbing that it seems like the main people that engage on his behalf online are unable to do that. Now, the argument with Noam Chomsky is basically they're speaking in two different worlds. And the main point that just comes through again and again and again is that Sam Harris does not understand politics, and he does not understand international relations at all. And his argument is that Noam Chomsky does not take into account intention when he evaluates the actors in political atrocities or terrorism. So Noam Chomsky looks at things in a very quantitative and very clear way. And he'll say, look, if you lob a missile haphazardly at a site, and your intention is to not kill a whole bunch of civilians, but you're perfectly aware that this is going to happen, and you have mass firepower to do it, and you're doing it for any number of reasons. I will say also, without getting into this separate conversation, I don't agree with Noam Chomsky's assessments of why things always happen in foreign policy either, but that's for another day. At least, again, I disagree with Noam Chomsky sometimes, but Noam Chomsky is a leading authority in this stuff, and his conversation is taking place in the real world. Sam Harris will turn around and say, well, what's really going on is that U.S. and Western foreign policy makers are always making policy essentially and mostly with the highest of motive. Now, I can already see that I'm sure that Sam Harris has laid some markers somewhere that complicates that view. So he'll say, well, generally, of course, the United States, it was terrible what they did supporting Pinochet in Chile. So I'm no apologist for U.S. foreign policy, okay? I'm sure he'll throw a marker like that down. But fundamentally, his view is that even something like the invasion of Iraq, which may have been a huge mistake, according to what day it is for him, was done in a spirit of genuinely trying to improve the world. That was the intention. Now, again, I think if that's really your view of the decision-making behind the invasion of Iraq, that's delusional. Secondly, as Chomsky would point out, in addition to it being delusional, who cares if the result is disastrous? But the second and more problematic point, in my view, that Harris didn't even attempt to get to with Chomsky because Chomsky kept laying out the numbers and saying, let's talk about this. And Sam Harris would hit back with some sophomore year philosophy thought experiment that didn't answer the question. And that was why it got frustrating to read. But the other thing is that Harris will always say that civilian casualties and the humanitarian byproducts of interventions in the Middle East or South Asia by the United States are always essentially going to be boiled down to Muslims being barbarians. So Iraq, why did it fall apart? Not because we waged an illegal invasion and bombed the infrastructure and dissolved, and got rid of everybody who played a role in the civil service and had a disastrous privatization schemes and had no plans for governance, no reasons to go in to begin with. No. The reason is simply because Shia and Sunnis have this ancient tribal hatred, which again, as I've explained on this show, is incredibly simplistic. It's not like just, well, I have a different religious view than you. that's an aspect of it, but there's patronage networks. There's systems of economy and distribution. Ironically, all of the real world terrestrial concerns that Sam Harris claims to be obsessed with never enter his thinking or barely register. So for a guy who claims to be very empirically driven and fact-based, he never looks at the most relevant empirical factors on the ground, which are economic and political and power distribution. So then what he'll say is it's like this horrible self-reinforcing loop, which is that, you know, we do stuff even if it's a mistake for the best of motives. It works out poorly because Muslims, by and large, are irrational barbarians, which then, of course, reinforces some of the thought processes that lead to stupid policy. And then we go to the next cycle. And I just want to add one more point just to get this out, and then I'll finish. He also has accused people on the left and people that critique him of not standing in solidarity with Muslim moderates and Muslim activists on the ground in places like Pakistan, Syria, Iraq, who are working on behalf of human rights, who are working on behalf of women's rights. And, you know, he's right about some of these things, okay? There's no postmodern justification for the treatment of women in a place like Saudi Arabia. There's no doubt that obviously religious fanaticism of any kind leads to a lot of human suffering. But he then slides and says, well, you know, Ain Hirsi Ali is a representative of this Muslim voice on the ground. Look, Ain Hirsi Ali has a traumatic background. I in no way question her biography or where she's coming from, although, you know, other people may wish to do so. That's not my interest. But the reality is that she is a Western pundit. That's her job now. She lives in D.C. or New York.
Well, she's kind of a fraud, too. I mean,
and she travels the world talking about Muslims in blanket ways and advocating horrific policies in war. She's a Western pundit. She's not a civil rights activist on the ground. She's not someone who's working for the rights of women in Pakistan. She's not a reformer in Iran. She's not Mir Hussein Mousavi, who's still in house arrest. She's not Mehdi Korobi, who's still in house arrest. None of these people register in the conversation. So Sam Harris basically has this sort of stunning naivete when it comes to our foreign policy, fused with a relentless one-dimensional view of Islam and Muslims, which lead to disastrous policies. And then he backs up and he says, well, wait, I'm the one who really supports Muslim activists, except never the ones who are actually working on the ground in these situations, dealing with the dead bodies, dealing with the undermining of feminist movements because of reckless drone policies. And then he sits back and then he pushes this to, unfortunately, all too often, a tremendously smug and self-satisfied and incredibly uninformed audience to reinforce their one-dimensional worldview about places they've never been to and things they have little to no understanding of. So that's my basic spiel. And it was embarrassing. I mean, you know, again, agree or disagree, Noam Chomsky's just at a different level. It's just not, they're not in the same realm.
Yeah, he's not really on the same level as Harris, and Harris is really...
Well, Harris isn't on the same level as him.
The whole thing is, look, yeah, we're better.
Right.
And everything follows from that. So obviously we mean well, and they're evil.
Yeah, you know, he doesn't have a sophisticated worldview.
Be bigoted to begin with to buy into that stuff.
Right. I agree with you completely, Nate. I appreciate the call.